Day 129 to 12:31 p.m. Newton Lake, Veterans Memorial Park, Oakland, Camden County, New Jersey, United States of America. After hearing that voice, Ilya revealed a very unusual excited expression on her face. It was as if her entirety was born, only for that voice. She immediately left Mark and May and flew towards the tree as if she was a child waiting for her parents' return. The eyes of Mark and May fell onto the tree. What they immediately noticed was that the tree started to distort. It was as if the substance that made up the tree was not a solid matter in the first place. Then, the whole tree started to get sucked up onto a single point. That point was nothing else but the magic circle that swallowed Jude and Else. Like strands of spaghetti sucked into someone's mouth, the cursed tree entered the magic circle. And as the magic circle collapsed, an entity behind it was revealed. The appearance of the man had made Mark frown. Without a doubt, Jude and Else were the foundations in creating that body. It looked like Jude, but also had Else's white hair and pointed ears. Furthermore, Mark could feel the psychic ability that Jude inherited in that entity. But most of all, this being was an unknown entity. Only half of his body was flesh. The exact right half was more or less made of wood. No, it was without a doubt wood. Half of his body came from the cursed tree. He also had 6 wings, as if he was something like an arch-being. What Mark could not fathom even more was this entity's body was even more composed of different things. The most noticeable was the 6 wings that were on the entity's back. Each of them belonged to a different creature. On the left, one looked like a bat's, the other was of an eagle, and another was a moth's. On the other side, one was of a dove's, the second was of a crow's, and the last seemed to be from a butterfly. His right eye looked like a cat's, while the other was of a goat's. His left foot had talons. His right foot looked like a monkey's. He had no right hand but had a mantis scythe instead. The other hand looked normal, aside from the sharp claws that seemed similar to a tiger's. He had a pair of horns. One was a ram's, the other was of a bull's. He also had a tail similar to a snake. The more Mark stared, the more he found the creature strange. This entity was not a demon, it was an incarnation of evil. If it was not a fiend, it was a devil. While Mark was staring at the reborn creature, the other was doing the same. It was not surprising since both of them were quite similar. They were both entities that should not exist in this world. It's my first time meeting something like you. The creature opened his mouth. What are you even? For the first time in a while, Mark heard that question. And to say, it was easier for non-humans to identify each other. Ilya was delighted to see her master once more. However, his question to Mark made her quite surprised. Master, Ilya said as she embraced the creature. From her behavior, it was more accurate to say that she was like a python coiled around a person. She did not even show any shame as she rubbed her voluptuous body on another person. Ilya. The creature turned to the succubus. How long had it been since we last saw each other? It had been 5,262 years, 12 hours, 51 minutes, and 10 seconds, according to the modern measure of time, Master. Hearing that reply, Mark and May shivered. It was such a creepy degree of devotion that she had towards her master. I see. The creature held Ilya's cheek affectionately. Don't worry, this time, I won't go away. Yes. Ilya replied, trying hard to conceal her tears. Sure enough, these two people loved each other that even the millenniums that passed was not enough to end it. However, it seemed that unforeseen circumstances caused them to separate, leaving Ilya alone. Ilya. The creature spoke while flexing his fingers. This body seemed to have some foreign powers. Yes. 6 years ago, this guy gained the ability to control the wind. I turned him into my partner. I did not really intend to make him the sacrifice for your body since his power is useful, but I had no choice. Is there something wrong with it? Ilya asked. That power you are talking about is rejecting me. He then turned to Mark. And that entity seemed to be connected to it. Ilya was even more surprised. She finally realized the reason why Mark seemed to want to kill Jude earlier. Since it's rejecting you, can you just give it back? Mark suddenly spoke. This was not the first time he encountered an ability that seemed to have a mind of its own. And if it was rejecting this creature, he would not be able to use it at all without using some methods. Unexpectedly, the creature gave a quite favorable reaction. Nevertheless, it would not be easy. I don't mind returning it, but I believe that you took the last thing I needed for my perfect revival. Mark frowned. This creature was obviously talking about Elise. However, there was no way for him to let go of her. Why do you even need her for? Mark asked. Although he did not mind fighting this guy, he had no reason to aside from Elise and that ability that Jude inherited. If he could take both, without fighting, then why not? My rebirth is premature. I needed more energy to stabilize the connection of my new body and soul. An energy well like her is just what I needed. The creature explained patiently. An energy well, it was a good term to call Elise. So, you're going to eat her? The creature then snickered. What is wrong with that? Mark shrugged. It was no surprise. To this creature, humans were no different from livestock. Then, Mark smiled. I can't give her, but if you only needed more energy, I can give you something else in exchange. The creature frowned. But then, sighed. Then, let's fight. The creature suggested. If you manage to prove yourself enough, I will agree. Master. Ilya called out in protest. There's no need for you to come in terms with them. To those words, the creature smiled bitterly. Ilya, it's already been thousands of years, yet you did not even grow a bit. No matter how powerful you are, never underestimate the ones that stood before you. It was even more if you were facing an entity like him. The creature spoke while staring at Mark. You two are people whose destinies aren't bound by fate, am I right? That question made Ilya's eyes turn wide. Potential gods. You know a lot, don't you? Even the deities we encountered before were not able to see us that deep. Mark said, not denying the claim. Not because I wanted to. The creature replied bitterly. Well then, should we start? At that question, Mark turned to May. Retreat back. I'll handle this alone. Will it be fine? May asked worriedly. After all, even though the creature was not aggressive, she could feel a very dangerous sensation coming from him. There's no killing intent, so it's fine. Mark patted May's head. Also, I think I know what he wanted to do to propose a fight. May nodded and retreated, as Mark said. On the other side, Ilya did the same. Before we start, let me introduce myself. The creature bowed slightly. I am Chimetris, an artificial devil chimera. Mark was surprised. Sure enough, this creature was not something that was supposed to exist. An artificial creature almost at the level of a deity that was created 5,000 years ago. No wonder that he was sealed with a curse. Of course, Mark would not return courtesy with discourtesy. Just call me Mark. As for what I am, I don't know myself. Just consider me as a pureblood blood demon. With the end of the introductions, it was the sign for the battle to start. The creature smiled and flapped his wings. Afterimages were left as he flew about. Mark's eyes turned wide as his eyes immediately turned violet. At the last moment, he flapped his wings as strong as he could, and flew in a different direction. The scythe on Chimetris's right hand almost grazed Mark. Mark bitterly smiled as his blood started to boil. They were not fighting to their death. Nevertheless, it did not mean that they would hold back. After missing his attack, Chimetris passed by Mark and made a wide turn behind. However, it seemed that he was having some difficulty in controlling his flight. Finally turning back, he unleashed another attack at Mark. This time, he waved his right arm, sending wooden projectiles from his wooden hand. The violet glow in Mark's eyes intensified, facing hundreds of projectiles flying towards him. He brandished his scythe, warding off any projectile that was about to hit his body. Seeing that, Chimetris smiled. It would be easier for Mark to avoid the attack entirely, but he decided to face it off directly. Chimetris charged towards Mark once more. This time, he kicked Mark using his foot with talons. Mark then waved his scythe, trying to block the talons. Bam! A strong shockwave traveled across the vicinity of the border. May and Ilya could not help but get pushed back. After that clash, both Mark and Symmetris were pushed back. Symmetris looked fine, but Mark was frowning. Although Mark managed to stand his ground, both his arms were shivering from numbness. The physical strength of this devil was something out of this world. "Don't hold back and use your other abilities," Symmetris spoke. "If you keep it like this, I might accidentally kill you." Mark smiled bitterly. This guy was not joking. Symmetris had no intention to kill, but with his current condition, he really might accidentally kill Mark. Symmetris had just reborn from thousands of years of slumber. After acquiring a new body, his control of it was almost non-existent. It was the reason he proposed a fight. He wanted to get used to his new body as soon as possible. Disregarding the numbness, Mark moved. It was his turn to attack. His wings glowed red as he flapped it. He then soared towards Symmetris at almost the same speed as Symmetris had done before. Clang! Two scythes clashed with each other. Symmetris received the attack without any difficulty. Mark then twisted his body, using his whole body as leverage, and pushed Symmetris's mantis scythe upwards. With the force of the spin, the right arm of Symmetris was pushed up, creating a wide opening. The red glow in Mark's veins concentrated on his left foot, and with another swift spin, he unleashed a strong kick. Bam! Symmetris flew several meters away, unsteadily. Mark's left foot connected with his right flank with a crisp sound of contact. Instead of feeling pain, however, Symmetris smiled even more. He could feel the control of his body getting firmer. The pressure of fighting Mark was forcing him to adapt to his new body faster. Mark did not want to let Symmetris rest. After the latter was pushed back, he immediately followed. He waved his scythe towards the wings of Symmetris. Comparing their flight speeds, the devil was faster. Mark wanted to put it at the same level as his. Of course, Symmetris would not let that happen. His bat wing faced Mark's scythe directly. Clang! A metallic sound echoed as the batwing and the scythe clashed. Unexpectedly, the batwing was more of metal than actual flesh. That clash pushed the two away from each other once more. "Do you have to be that ruthless?" Symmetris complained as he checked his batwing. "You already said that I should not hold back, right?" Mark smiled. There was one thing that he read in novels that he could not understand before. It was using fists to know the opponent. For the first time, he started to understand the concept. And his conclusion with this guy: not everything with evil energy and was created from evil was evil itself. Day 129 to 12:35 p.m. Newton Lake, Veterans Memorial Park, Oakland, Camden County, New Jersey, United States of America. Staring at his opponent, Mark smiled. Symmetris was not evil, at least, at the general moral standpoint. He was not a person who would deliberately cause chaos without reason. His expressions, movements, and mentality indicated that he was quite a peaceful person that should be left alone. Of course, from a human standpoint, he was evil. He was a devil, after all. He looked at humans as livestock, but it was no different from how humans saw cows, pigs, and chickens. It was not a difference in a moral level, but more from the difference in races. Humans were humans. Demons were demons. Spirits were spirits. Devils were devils. Each kind had their different point of views. Of course, it was free for any to accept the view of the other race. Nevertheless, it was not right to force their views on others. And in this aspect, humans were the most sinful. After all, humans were known to push their idealism to other races more. Mark and Symmetris contested against each other using speed and physical strength. Each time their attacks clashed, loud sounds and shockwaves spread across the vicinity of the enclosed space. Still, while both of them seemed equal, Mark was barely holding on. Although he could persist, it would not last too long. Symmetris was far above Mark in speed and strength. It was even though he was barely putting effort into his attacks. Instead, he concentrated on getting perfect control of his new body. It was unacceptable to say, but if this was a life and death fight, there was a high possibility that Mark would get killed. It was even if he used all of his cards in hand. In the least, Mark could have the ability to escape, but not defeat Symmetrus. Luckily, it was just a peaceful contest. Although the attacks were ruthless and unforgiving, the two were at least making sure not to use anything deadly. They were even missing the other's vital parts on purpose and were concentrating on restricting the other. Symmetrus flapped one of his wings to attack now and then. He also used his different body parts in the same way. It was so that he could get more control of these parts evenly. Mark, however, could not help but feel amazed. Surely, Mark had different abilities. He was a mutator and an empath. He had his blood enhancement. There was also his shadow mist movement, and lastly, the psi crystal, and the other crystals that came with it. And Symmetrus was not that different from him. This artificial devil chimera, it was not wrong to say that he was a multitude of abilities slapped together. Each of his body parts that looked different had a different ability and power. Furthermore, it seemed like Mark appraised Symmetrus's body mistakenly. At first, Mark thought that this devil had a body composed of different common animals, but to think of it, was he correct? As they fought, Mark started to change his mind. The bat wing that had very high defense, it was more of a dragon's now in his eyes. The eagle wing seemed regular, but it actually had a golden sheen. Furthermore, the moment it flapped, there was a significant increase in his speed. The moth wing that Symmetrus had no intention of using, it had an aura of death around it. The dove wing that had a pure white color, it emanated an aura similar to that succubus, Ilia. The wing of the crow, it emanated the aura of bad luck for some reason. And the wing of the butterfly, staring at it made Mark felt like his soul was being sucked away. His eye that was similar to a cat, the moment it moved, Mark always missed his attacks. On the other hand, the goat eye seemed to have the ability to mess with emotions. As for the remaining ones, it significantly increased his physical abilities in different areas. Bang! Mark and Symmetrus clashed once more and were pushed away from each other. Hey, Mark suddenly spoke. Is your body made up of different magical creatures? Hearing that, Symmetrus looked at Mark with an expression of surprise. How did you know? Mark groaned. Magical creatures were inhuman in the first place. The stronger ones could even trash higher beings in a physical fight. It was no wonder Symmetrus was this physically strong. Well, Mark should have thought of it since the start. After all, even if a chimera was created, there was no way for each wing that seemed to have come from a regular creature had such a large size. It would not be surprising if these animal parts actually came from pets of gods. Then, can you tell me where your body parts came from? Mark asked. It was because he had some uncanny suspicions. Symmetrus looked at Mark, unsure why he was asking. Nevertheless, he seemed to not mind answering the question. Actually, I don't know where these came from. Symmetrus shrugged. I just woke up like this one day. Then, he seemed to have remembered something. Ah, right. Symmetrus pointed at the eagle wing he had. I once heard my creator mumbling about capturing an eagle atop some world tree when he looked at this wing. Mark froze. Then, can you tell me why you are sealed in that curse? Mark asked once more as he charged towards Symmetrus. Bam! The scythe and the tiger's claw collided, even though Mark attacked from a tricky angle. The reason? Symmetrus replied as he counter-attacked. After I killed my creator since he mistreated Ilia, several gods came chasing me, claiming that I stole something from them. They cannot kill me, and they decided to seal me instead. Mark became silent. He could not decide which one he should refute first in that reply. The most crucial fact, however, Mark was currently fighting a being that even gods from the past could not kill. Seriously. Just how lucky were Mark and May? This is why I wanted to recover fast, Symmetrus said as he unleashed a kick towards Mark. Those gods might realize that the cursed seal is broken and appear here. That's why I need to consume that woman. Mark blocked the kick with the shaft of his scythe. He was flung back and had to flap his wings hard to keep in balance. But after receiving the kick, Mark was staring at Symmetris with a troublesome expression. Then, he turned to Ilya. "You didn't tell your master about what happened to the gods?" Symmetris and Ilya froze at that question. "What do you mean?" Symmetris asked. "Don't blame Ilya, as there is no way for us to talk while I'm sealed. And as you can see, I just woke up." He then turned to Ilya. "Do you know what he is talking about?" "Master." Ilya started pushing her 2 index fingers together. "Actually, I don't know either." Cough. Cough. Mark choked. Even May had a bitter expression. "Why would I know that?" Ilya complained. "When the master was sealed, I fell into slumber. It hasn't even been 100 years since I woke up. The moment I did, I disregarded everything, even the human war, and concentrated on breaking the seal. I have no time to deal with those bastard gods." Hearing everything, Mark sighed. He lost the eagerness to continue fighting. "Can we stop here and talk instead?" Mark suggested. On the other hand, Symmetris could only nod. It seemed that he noticed that there was something wrong. "By the way, can you remove this space first?" Mark asked, pointing at the barrier. "I'll do that later." Symmetris shook his head. "I'm still absorbing the essence released by the curse." Mark shrugged. If that was the case, there was nothing he could do. Actually, he wanted to talk it over lunch. It was already past noon, and Mark and May had no time to eat lunch yet because of the commotion. Mark then called for May, while Ilya quickly rushed and coiled herself on Symmetris's body. They all sat down near where the cursed tree initially stood. It was because the thickest essence of the curse emanated from that location. Mark and May had some difficulty approaching the place at first due to the thick evil aura. But with a wave of Symmetris's hand, Mark and May were both protected from it. Getting some snacks from their storage rings, Mark shared some food with Ilya and Symmetris. A scene where 2 pureblood blood demons, a succubus, and a godly living weapon eating junk food together, it was an unbelievable sight to see. Now that they sat down, Mark relayed the information he heard from Bathala. The event where the current observer had chased away most of the gods and deities that existed in the past, and how the ones that were left were hiding in different places, not daring to come out easily. Ilya was surprised while Symmetris calmly accepted the information. If no gods were chasing them now, they could live peacefully somewhere in Earth as long as they did not get the attention of the current observer. "Say, did you two know anything about Ouroboros?" Mark suddenly asked. He was probing them, or at least, he wanted some information. He also provided a rough outline of what the organization was. To answer the question, Symmetris shook his head. "If what you said about them causing chaos to get revenge on humans, then they don't exist before I was sealed." Mark understood what Symmetris meant. Back then, legends of gods, humans, and beasts living together was born. There was very little reason for this kind of organization to exist. The organization was probably born after humans took most of the control of Earth. On the other hand, Ilya had a different answer. "That organization tried to recruit me every now and then. They're a bunch of annoying people. I already said that I only live for my master, but they still kept on pestering me like flies." Mark felt relieved that these two had no ties with the Ouroboros. "It is better that you two stay away from them," Mark said. "Are they your enemies?" Symmetris asked. "Pretty much, but not all of them." Mark replied. After all, he had not received any reply from Yukine as he was away from the base for a few days already. "I see." Symmetris nodded. "They seem to be a troublesome bunch. I rather spend my time with Ilya than join them." Hearing that, Ilya looked at Symmetris with a red face. It was not wrong to say that her pupils turned into hearts. It was as expected of a succubus. Symmetris had Ilya by his side. Mark turned to May. He was not that different. In any case, it was time to peacefully settle things. "Can you return me Jude's ability, now?" Mark asked. Symmetris nodded. And on his hand, some white smoke started to float in place. Mark then conjured an empty, mental crystal, and the smoke was sucked into it. Seeing the crystal, however, both Shemetris and Ilya was shocked. Pure energy crystal essence. Where did you get that? Ilya spoke, staring intently at the mental crystal that now contained the ability to control the wind. Do you know what this is? Mark asked as he took out another, empty crystal. It is the crystallization of a pure energy source. My creator had one of those before, and he said that it was something that came from a higher plane and rarely existed on this planet. I remember him saying that it needed 1,000,000 years of undisturbed energy source for it to crystallize in that form. For it to be on the size of the crystal on your hand, it should be more than 5,000,000 years. Hearing that, it was Mark and May's turn to be shocked. Who would have thought that Keeper's ability was far more than what they had thought? Day 129 to 12:40 p.m. Newton Lake, Veterans Memorial Park, Oakland, Camden County, New Jersey, United States of America. The sudden information about the crystals created by the Psi crystal took Mark and May off guard. Who would have thought that these crystals were something that actually existed before and was not just created by Keeper's ability? Furthermore, it was not something that could be seen easily. Even just the real rarity of these was enough to Mark freeze. A rarity of 1 in 1,000,000 years, and even just the conditions it needed to form was hard to find. Yet, Mark had a lot of it. Of course, the physical crystals were excluded since they were created from mutagen stones, and not magical energy. Nevertheless, he still had a lot. It gave Mark a deep need to conceal this secret far more than before. If the information about him having many of these was to spread around, it was not surprising if the whole world started to chase him. Now, it was no wonder Bathala had such a reaction after seeing the crystals before. And now, Shemetrik and Ilya were the same. Luckily, Bathala and these two did not seem to be greedy for these crystals. Or else, it would be a grave mistake to show these to them. Can you two tell us more about these crystals? Mark asked Shemetris and Ilya. That question, however, made the two look at each other before shaking their heads. Nothing much is really known about those since they are impossibly rare in this realm. Its rarity is enough to make lower gods contest for one. Even deities would even be desperate to get their hands on one of those. Apparently, it was quite similar to what they heard from Bathala. Gods and deities could grow stronger by the power of worship. If no people were worshipping them, or in the least, believing in them, their strength would regress, and they would become fallen gods. Fallen gods, although still gods, they had lesser strength than higher deities. To prevent that from happening, they needed other sources of strength. However, they could not just turn towards any other energy source. What they needed was a pure energy essence. The pure energy crystal essence were among the rarest and most potent sources of energy for godly beings. But we met a reclused god before. He didn't seem to know much about these crystals. Mark said. It's not surprising, Ilya retorted as she munched on some cheese-flavored potato chips. Even we only knew about this by coincidence. I don't know if you two knew this, but in this world that humans called Earth, new gods are almost impossible to be born no matter what potential they had. That god you were talking about definitely came from another world or realm, am I right? He did say that he came from a lower realm, Mark nodded. Then that tells it, Ilya said while seductively licking the cheese stuck on her fingers. We already said that these crystals exist more in higher realms. Only those from higher realms knew more about these. Mark grew silent. It seemed that even if he scoured the whole earth to gather more information about these crystals, what he would find was very little. You two say that it is rare, but you two don't seem to have an interest in it. Mark said, looking at the two. Because there is no point? Ilya replied. You see, there are different kinds of an energy source that could possibly give birth to a pure energy crystal essence. Each energy source also had its own elemental attributes that the crystal it formed would inherit. Ilya then pointed at the mental crystal on Mark's hand. That seemed to be an attributeless one. Even though anyone can absorb that, it can only give an eighth of energy that crystals with attributes had. So, basically, although attributeless ones were rarer than those with attributes, It was the most useless among them, to the point that even humans could absorb it with little consequences. As if a teacher teaching her students, Ilya continued. According to her, the most common attributes of these energy crystals were fire. It was created inside undisturbed volcanoes sleeping deep under the sea. As for the other attributes, it was safe to say that they were non-existent on this small blue planet, as most energy sources it had were always being disturbed. However, not everyone could openly absorb these crystals. Although the attributeless ones could be absorbed by humans and only suffer fever while enhancing their minds and psychic powers, absorbing those with attributes carelessly and forcefully would end up in grave repercussions. Ilya presented herself and Shemetris as examples. Both of them were beings that had attributes. Shemetris had powers that came from curses and evil forces like miasma. On the other hand, Ilya feeds off the energy from the essence of males, since she was a succubus. If both of them received a fire-attributed, pure energy crystal essence, it would not react to their bodies. If they forcefully absorbed it, it would be no surprise if they end up burning and worse, turning into ashes. Only those with fire attributes could absorb a fire-pure energy crystal essence, whether it be magical creatures or psychic humans. Hearing about these, Mark and May turned at each other. It was no wonder Amihan and Spera could only absorb crystals with specific colors. It was the same for their other people. But then, Mark remembered that Bathala seemed to have an interest in the crystals without minding the colors. As such, Mark could not help but ask this question. And to Mark's question, Ilya replied with another surprising question. Is that God you were talking about some kind of god of creation? Gods of creation had more than one attribute. If not, then, he probably wants to use crystals on the deities under them or something. There was no need to ask further, it definitely answered Mark's question. But then... Wait, Ilya said as she stared at Mark intently. Do you have other crystals with different attributes? Sure enough, Ilya managed to realize that fact as Mark asked that question. It was not like that Mark was intending to hide it from these two. He already managed to deduce the personality of Shemetris and Ilya. There was no need to be cautious around them. As for Shemetris, as long as no one harmed Ilya, he was more or less disinclined to take drastic actions. Mark, however, did not answer Ilya's question. He turned to Shemetris. If you have crystals with a suited attribute, how many do you need compared to eating Elise? Mark then stared at Shemetris. He was waiting for this devil to swallow all the junk food he stuffed in his mouth. Even Ilya was quite embarrassed to see her master like this and wiped the crumbs on his face. Sorry, Shemetris said as he swallowed his food. This food was filled with impurities, but it tastes good. I never had anything like it before. Of course, that was true. These kinds of food that tasted good but had very low nutritional value were not invented yet 5,000 years ago. That energy well woman can give me a lot of energy, but it's still unrefined. Comparing to the attributed crystal my creator had before. Changing its attribute, then about the same size as yours. Probably about 3. Shemetris said while thinking deeply. Of course, by his expression, he was not expecting that Mark would be able to give him that and was just asking out of curiosity. 3, huh? Mark said as he conjured 3 crystals on his hand. There, 3 gray-colored crystals appeared. It was among the crystals he managed to create since the curse was activated. Here. Mark then presented the crystals to Shemetris. Shemetris was surely surprised, but Ilya was about to get a heart attack. Did you come from some rich god family in the higher realm? Ilya could not help but blurt out in shock, but then, she realized. That was impossible. After all, Mark did not seem to know the significance of these crystals. Mark ignored Ilya and placed the crystals on Shemetris's left hand. Absorb these quickly. How long do you need? Also, how long will this place last? The other 3 could not help but fell silent. It was as if Mark was suddenly in a hurry. Gerger, is something wrong? May finally opened her mouth. Since they sat down here, she had been silent. We have company, you see. Mark shrugged. Also, don't look around. They didn't know that I already detected them. They're lurking around the border. It seems like they can't enter. Shemetris seemed to be nonchalant about it. However, Ilya and May froze. Do I need to be in perfect shape? Shemetris asked. You already said that the gods are mostly non-existent now. If it were just some deities, my current state is more than enough to deal with them. Mark then sighed. I forgot to tell you. The gods are already gone. But the cause of them leaving Earth is being active right now. Mark's eyes turned quite serene. Your revival caused quite a commotion, and you are pretty much a godly being, yourself. I'm afraid we will run into one of his eyes once we leave this place. Hearing that, Shemetris frowned. Are you talking about the apostles of the Observer? Since you know about them, it makes things easier to explain, Mark replied with a nod. There are several people outside the barrier. I can tell that none of them are human except for one that I could not fathom. That one is just hiding and observing. I suspect that one is an eye. I encountered 2 eyes before. I get the same feeling coming from that person. An eye. Ilya shivered in anger. One of those bastards is the very reason why my master was sealed. Mark then turned to Ilya, asking for an explanation. Actually, Master's existence is a secret to the gods. He is not a god, yet he could rival them in strength and abilities to some extent. The gods learned about him and tried to eliminate him. Then, you know what happened next. Ilya explained. An eye leaked his existence to the gods. Probably, from the previous observer. I see. Mark nodded and turned to Shemetris. It's better if you absorb those crystals now. I don't know if we can avoid a conflict with the people outside. Shemetris nodded. He would not be afraid of gods and deities, but the eyes were a completely different issue. Compared to gods and deities, the eyes were far more unpredictable. Thus, without hesitation, Shemetris activated the crystals and absorbed all of it in his body in one go. Now, they only needed to wait until the energy from the crystals helped his body reach his peak. On the other hand, Mark thought deeply about what Ilya had just said. While the current observer was getting rid of gods and deities, the previous one was not without faults either. It was the same as what happened to the blood demons. The eyes manipulated the angels and devils to get rid of the blood demon race. In the case of Shemetris and Ilya, that eye instigated the gods to get rid of Shemetris. Mark thought of the situation deeply. He started to get the gist of what these observers wanted to do. In one way or another, it felt like the observers were not only managing the number of humans on Earth but were also removing any factor that could change the aspects of the world. Especially the ones that would change it from what it looked like on the surface. It was as if they were limiting the advance of Earth into a single direction. Realizing that, Mark started to feel a sense of crisis. In the future, there was a very high possibility he would be among the list that the observers would want to erase. Day 129 to 12:39 p.m. Newton Lake, Veterans Memorial Park, Oakland, Camden County, New Jersey, United States of America. Not long after Mark and Shemetris stopped their battle and sat down to talk, several people arrived outside the barrier. Although some of them looked human on the surface, none of them were humans. These people belonged to 2 different groups. The first group was composed of 30 people, while the other only had a single person. Comparing the 2 groups, it was quite odd that the group with only one person felt more dangerous than the other. It was even stranger since the person looked harmless compared to the other group. Soft brown hair, a pair of soft, small cheeks, about 54 inches in height, and looked around 10 years old. No matter how anyone looked, it was nothing but a young boy. Nevertheless, the aura around him was no less than a monster. He had an arrogant feel on his eyes as if he looked down on others, and more than anything else, there was a vertical, 3rd eye on his forehead and seemed to have 2 more closed slits that lay between each of the 2 eyes and the 3rd eye. It was safe to assume that this boy had 5 eyes on his face. Without a doubt, one of the apostles of the Observer. The moment he arrived, he did not dare touch the barrier in front of him. In a single look, he knew that it was a harmful border between reality and a cursed space. Damn it. The fifth should be the one observing this since she's more versed in curses. The boy murmured. Unfortunately, the one he was talking about was in a different location right at this moment. After a destroyer vanished in the spirit dimension and the sudden death of the 11th, the other higher-ranking eyes were quite busy at the moment. Geez, why did something big like this happen this time? And while I'm taking a nap? The boy complained as he started his real duty. It was to observe from the shadows. As the other group arrived, none of them saw the boy that was standing right in front of them. There was no need for the boy to act immediately. He was different from the scouts and the destroyers. He was a direct apostle. Their duty was to search for things and beings that fit some criteria. It was those anomalies that could tilt the balance of the world, avoiding the current set of rules present in the surface. Gathering information about them and reporting these to their master. And lastly, executing the judgment of their master regarding that anomaly. Yawn. The boy stretched his arms sleepily while looking at the gigantic bird in front of him. I'll just do my job, I guess. I don't want to get scolded. Master had been quite pissed off since the work of another guy unexpectedly entered Earth and turned it into this mess. It also caused those guys hiding to become more unruly after being left alone. The boy sure was talkative. He was talking to no one but himself, though. As the boy sat on the roof, he watched the other group as they flew around like idiots. These guys are definitely members of that organization. The boy murmured. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. The other group was composed of 15 people. They were riding on the back of a large bird that seemed to release charges of electricity on its wings each time it flapped. 5 within the group looked totally human. However, they were releasing a thing aura of death from their bodies. It felt like they were ghosts even though they seemed to have bodies of their own. 2 were 9-foot-tall man and woman with an oddly thin physique, pale skin, several layers of sharp teeth, and a bald head. Their hunger for human flesh was visible in his eyes. 3 were women with odd energy emanating from their bodies. They were wearing pointed hats and black robes that definitely pointed out what they were. Different from common depictions, however, they all seemed to be young. Furthermore, the one that stood in the center had blood-red-colored hair. And lastly, the other 5. These 5 definitely looked human, and the leader of this group was among these 5. Despite their human appearance, however, they were emanating an aura no different from canine beasts. The leader stared at the barrier in front of him. He seemed to be a man in his early 30s. His body was quite muscular and was bursting with energy. Despite that, however, his hair was white as an elderly. What a strong curse, the leader said as he looked at the barrier and its effects of the curse on the infected below. He then turned to the 3 witches. Any ideas if we can come in? Unfortunately, each of them shook their heads. This curse is beyond our capabilities. The red-haired witch spoke. All we can do is wait until the barrier subsided and see what caused it. After hearing those words, the white-haired man frowned. They were members of Ouroboros from Pennsylvania that was currently assigned near the area. After they felt a strong fluctuation of evil energy coming from this location, he immediately gathered a team and took their fastest Thunderbird to get here. He was quite annoyed to know that they would not be able to enter as soon as they arrived. Any ideas on what could be inside? The leader of the group asked the witches once more. Witches were known experts of black magic and curses. It was not wrong to ask them. At that question, the 3 witches whispered at each other before the red-haired one replied. We 3 had the same conclusion. The red-haired witch looked at the barrier. It is very likely that someone or something managed to be relieved of its curse. Although it's already faint, there are traces of energy coming from a sealing curse that was forcefully torn. That made the leader nodded his head slightly. Since the outbreak came, different phenomenons had been happening one after another. The energy in the air caused by the mutagen had been causing anomalies not only to humans but also to magical creatures and objects. They even heard from one branch that even the spirit dimension was now filled with infected magical beings that were far more dangerous than their human counterparts. Even the spirit tree of Ouroboros in Ireland had already been subjected to attacks of such magical infected. We will wait then. The leader decided. Whatever it was that escaped its sealing curse, we must get it in our hands before others arrive. We might be able to find something we can offer to the branch leader and gain his favor." Everyone in the group agreed. The leader then commanded the Thunderbird to land as they wait. As they did that, however, the two tall people jumped off and caught several infected to munch on. These Wendigos really can't restrain themselves for too long. One of the people with strange spiritual fluctuations spoke with disdain. "It's not like you, demonic spirits are different," the red-haired witch retorted. That demonic spirit glared at the witch but did not say anything. Comparing hierarchy, these witches were still higher in the group. "You all stop arguing." The leader spoke. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. Really, what a bunch of idiots. The eye, who was watching nearby, murmured. They really think that they could get their hands on something that was sealed by a sealing curse created by multiple gods? They're dreaming too high. The boy looked at the barrier. Most people that could feel the energy in the barrier would only be able to tell that it was a sealing curse. For the boy, however, he could feel the faint traces of energy released by the gods in this curse. It was already faded, though, causing the curse to weaken after thousands of years. Furthermore, since the gods that made the curse were no longer on Earth, it hastened the weakening of the curse. The boy sighed. He could not understand why observers liked implementing rules that the true God that created the world did not even give. "Who's there?" the white-haired leader suddenly shouted as he quickly turned to the direction of the boy. Hearing that, the boy smiled as he retreated. "This guy is not bad, he managed to detect my presence slightly." Although amused, the boy had no reason to reveal himself. These people were not included in his work, and he was lazy to include them. If the elimination of Ouroboros was among the work of the eyes, there was no way for them to last this long on Earth. The Ouroboros was left alone by the observer for a reason. Thus, the boy would not carelessly meddle with them. "Leader, there's nothing there," one of the direct subordinates of the leader said, looking in the same direction. "Strange," the leader said as he approached the place he was looking at. "I definitely felt a presence here." "Leader, maybe you're just hallucinating. Maybe this curse had other effects." Another subordinate chimed. The leader did not say anything. He was sure that he felt a presence there but suddenly vanished. From there, they could only wait. However, they could not help but frown as they noticed other groups appearing in the area as they waited. These newcomers were in no doubt also members of Ouroboros. Some came from the same branch, and some came from others. No one came near each other to talk, though. Competition between members and branches of Ouroboros was intense. This time, they were competing on who would get the thing that caused this event. Unexpectedly, not only the members of Ouroboros but others also appeared. Some wandering creatures appeared and even a group of Eastern warriors. There was even a small spacecraft. This was the United States, after all. After 3 hours of waiting, the red-haired witch stood up. "The barrier is weakening." The red-haired witch spoke. It seemed that among their group, she was the most sensitive towards magical energies as the others were yet to detect the subtle changes in the barrier. "Everyone, prepare yourselves." The leader spoke loud, forcing the two Wendigos to stop eating the infected and stand by. Another 10 minutes passed. The others finally felt that the barrier started to vanish. After another 5 minutes, they could see that the color inside the barrier started to return to normal. As the dark color of the surroundings vanished, the barrier finally dissipated. "Go!" the leader shouted, making the Thunderbird fly forward as fast as it could. They were not only ones that had the same idea. With their fastest speed, most of the groups rushed towards the center of the area affected by the barrier before it dissipated. Sure enough, friction between the groups commenced. Some were patient enough, though, and did not rush. Some gave up due to what was happening, while others wanted to be the Orioles behind the mantises. What added more to the chaos, however, was the infected that was affected by the curse. These infected started attacking anyone that came near, causing small battles here and there. Asterisk 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 at the center of it all, Mark frowned. Before, He did not expect that something like this would happen. He thought that only that first group in the eye lurking in the shadows would appear. But now, there were about 100 people, human or not, rushing towards them. And there was no place to hide, either, unless they wanted to dive onto the dirty lake that was now filled with dead fishes and insects. The biggest problem, however, the barrier vanished even though Chimetris was still in the process of absorbing the crystals. Like the others, it was better not to move him while in this state. It was the same for Amihan and Spera before, when they were in the spirit dimension. Thus, as the guests arrived, Mark, May, and Ilya had no choice but to hold them all back until Chimetris finished absorbing the crystals. Day 129 to 4:06 p.m. Newton Lake, Veterans Memorial Park, Oakland, Camden County, New Jersey, United States of America. Several minutes before the barrier vanished, Mark was already frowning as he detected new guests arriving one after another. It was a pretty problematic situation. Many people were approaching. Some of them were humans, but none of them were regular people. Luckily, the energy from the curse in the area they sat at was thick. It was to the point of obscuring the view from outside the barrier. In the least, before the barrier vanished, none of the guests outside could see them. "Gerger, what are we going to do now?" May could not help but ask as she readied her weapon. There, Ilya thought of something. "You have some space pocket, right? Can't you put Master inside that? After that, we can run away and escape." "You are going to trust us with that?" Mark asked. "It's not like we have other choices, do we?" Sure enough, even Ilya felt the pressure of the situation. She was willing to risk it rather than letting her master get harmed here. Mark smiled. It kind of felt nice, being trusted by someone you just met. Unfortunately, he could only shrug. "That's not possible." "Why?" Ilya frowned. "Isn't that woman inside?" Mark stared at Ilya. Even though this woman was over 5,000 years old, she was an airhead towards things like this. "That's a bluff," Mark replied. "We can't store living creatures inside. Elise already escaped with her brother. I just said that to make sure that you won't chase them." Ilya stared at Mark with a blaming look. She just realized that the man outside the barrier before was now gone. No wonder now. "Gerger, what about your miasma?" May whispered. If Mark used it, there would be no problem even if several times more enemies were surrounding them. "I'll leave that as our last card," Mark replied with a shrug. "I can't risk things with an eye lurking around." May nodded. It was a reasonable thing to do. Back then, Mark could just use it without regard for anything. It was because he barely knew things he should watch out for. Ignorance was bliss, as they said. Now, along with gaining knowledge about the hidden face of the world, he had many factors to consider before using his best abilities. It was even more now because the creatures and people that lived hidden in the society before the outbreak started coming out. If it was before the outbreak, most of these guests that appeared now would not even come here. Even the first thing to happen if the curse activated at that time would be the American military securing the place and controlling the information from coming out. Well now, the military could even barely keep themselves from collapse, not to mention taking control of these matters. Why the hell did we suddenly get thrown into a Chinese novel setting? Mark murmured with a deep sigh. Both Ilya and May heard that but could only look at him with confusion. The two could not understand why he said that, after all. Soon, the barrier vanished, and Chimetris was still not finished absorbing all the energy from the crystals. Ilya could not help but stand up, ready to fight. On the other hand, May was waiting for Mark's instructions. "You should sit down," Mark said to Ilya, "but just let me handle this for now. Don't make any rash moves unless I said so," Mark said with a serene expression. Ilya seemed hesitant. Furthermore, she had never taken any orders that did not come from her master. However, her master was still in a meditative state, and she knew that she was not too smart enough to deal with these kinds of situations. Thus, she could only back down and sit as close as possible to her master. May, on the other hand, remained on position. Still, it was clear that she was ready to act whenever Mark called for it. Mayor, hide your wings. Okay. While Mark told May that, he also hid his. If things go awry, it could serve as a good surprise. As Mark stood up, he took a deep breath. He was not scared, and rather than saying that he was calm, it was better to say that there were no traces of any emotions in his face. In this condition, it was easier to face the guests. Mark stared at the guests rushing towards the center of the place affected by the curse. Many of them did not even look human. There were even beasts that were only heard of from local mythology, legends, and folklore. It was somehow unexpected that there was a strange flying vehicle about the size of a bus. Furthermore, it was moving without making any unnecessary sound. There was also a small group of people riding on flying swords and were wearing traditional Chinese clothes. Without a doubt, they were cultivators from China. It was quite mysterious that they were here despite their county being on the other side of the globe. But the strangest thing that made Mark frown was that even though he could sense the presence of the eye in the surroundings, he could not see it or even pinpoint its exact location after the barrier vanished. He could feel that the eye never left, but it disappeared as if its existence earlier was nothing but a lie. On the other side, these guests that rushed towards the source of the curse could not help but stop on their tracks as they saw Mark's group. They could not fathom how there were people inside the barrier. "Who are you, people?" It was the middle-aged man with white hair that asked. He was the leader of the first group that arrived. Because they were riding on a Thunderbird, they reached the center faster than the others. There was a deep frown on the man's face. It was as if his house had been robbed empty or his wife had cheated on him. "Aren't we supposed to be the ones asking that question?" Mark replied. "Just because the barrier vanished, it doesn't mean that all of you can barge into our business. All of you should just leave." A reply that was rude but rational, that was what Mark said in return. "On what grounds should we leave?" One of the lackeys beside the white-haired man seemed to be offended and barked at Mark. "Because we are the ones that released the curse," Mark said nonchalantly. "It's our business and not any of you. Most people will say this to anyone sticking their noses where it doesn't belong. Mind your own business, right?" Many were appalled by the way Mark replied. Nevertheless, no one could refute him as it was the truth. "Then tell us what happened here. Why would something big like this happen?" Unexpectedly, it was a young man from the group of Chinese cultivators that chimed in. But Mark looked at him with a ridiculing look. "Are you deaf or an idiot? I already said that mind your own business." With that reply, the young man's face distorted in anger. If not for the elder behind him holding his shoulder, he might have rushed towards Mark already. "Hey, are you sure about this?" Ilya suddenly whispered from behind. "I don't think provoking them will do anything aside from making things worse." Mark did not reply to Ilya. Who knows whether there would be anyone among the uninvited guests with very keen hearing. However, it was never his intention to negotiate. In the face of these people, that would be a sign of weakness. Once that happened, they could consider themselves fish on the cutting board. These people would not hesitate to attack and try to get what they thought that might have caused this mess. It was even though there was nothing at all but Chimetras. By standing his ground, however, Mark saw his desired result. None of these people could tell why Mark was unafraid despite facing many powerful beings. It was even more strange since he looked nothing but a human. He might have a hidden card that could be used against them. Furthermore, the existence of Chimetras was already giving them pressure. Just him sitting there without moving worked as a ward over those with weaker hearts. Thus, none of them wanted to sacrifice themselves and test the waters. Then, Mark ignored the others and focused on the spaceship. "How are you all connected to Professor Alpha Alston?" Mark asked, sensing the 5 aliens aboard the small ship. While that question made the other guests confused, the spaceship unexpectedly made some movements. On its bottom, a hole opened, and a device that looked like a disc with a green lens showed up. From the lens, a greenish light beamed down in front of Mark. There, a holographic image of a creature that looked similar to Professor Alston appeared, a grayling. "Who are you, and what is your connection to Professor Alston?" The alien asked Mark in a pretty much broken speech. It seemed like compared to Professor Alston, this alien was not that proficient in speaking human language. An acquaintance. We met 3 days ago and exchanged information. Is that so? The alien replied. Then, it roamed its head around as if looking at something. Soon, it had a look of understanding. You're telling the truth, Professor Alston's acquaintance. We won't disturb you any longer. As soon as the grayling finished saying that, the holographic image vanished, and as quick as they arrived, the spaceship left. Did that guy look at something like a log? Mark murmured. Anyways, that got rid of one problem. Mark smiled slightly. It was just a gamble. He was not sure whether those aliens were connected to Professor Alston at all. However, he expected that there was no way that different alien groups would operate in a single area. The spaceship left, leaving everyone in awe. With that conversation, Mark had just revealed that he had some connection to an otherworldly force even though he looked like an ordinary human. That fact caused the remaining guests to become even more hesitant to make a move. It fell according to Mark's intentions. Now, without anyone testing the waters, none would make any drastic moves. Between Mark and the guests, it was correct to say that they were at a standstill. What Mark made dismayed, however, was the fact that none of the remaining guests had any intention to leave. It was quite expected, though. They were already here, and they would not go home without gaining anything. It looked like they really wanted to know what happened here. If Mark's group left, they would surely scour the area for clues. If that was the case, Mark had no problems with that. Once Chimethris woke up, there was no need to fear these people anymore. Even gods could not kill Chimethris, not to mention these people. Unfortunately, it would not be easy, though. Sitting on the bench not far from Mark, a child sat without being noticed by everyone. He was no other than the eye that arrived earlier. This guy is good, the boy murmured while looking at Mark. He managed to stall for time with just his words and actions. What a strange bunch. An unknown being, the body of void, a succubus, and a humanoid chimera. Then, the boy's eyes fell on Chimethris and seemed to be trying to remember something. Ah, I remember now. This one should be the anti-god weapon created 5,000 years ago. Looks like the ceiling curse that got broken is from him, huh? The boy then panned his eyes at the hyenas waiting for their opportunity to receive some gains in this mess. It's no fun if it continued like this, he murmured in a bored tone. There, a playful grin was showed on his face. That was when a voice echoed in everyone's ears except for Mark and his group. No one could tell where it came from and felt more like it was directly transferred into their heads. It was like a devil's whisper. Don't fall for that guy's schemes. He is just biding his time since that person with wings can't move while absorbing the treasure they unsealed. You should take advantage of the situation and steal the treasure before it is fully consumed. That was the voice said, triggering the greed in the hearts of these people. Day 129 to 4:10 p.m. Newton Lake, Veterans Memorial Park, Oakley, Camden County, New Jersey, United States of America. Knowing that his farce seemed to have some effect, Mark felt a bit relaxed. Furthermore, while no one could easily see it, his eyes were glowing red. He was trying to affect the minds of these people to a degree. With these arrangements, even if these people did not leave, they would not make a move. At least, not until they realized that Chimethris had no way of moving currently. Mark only needed another half hour. That was what he estimated from how fast Chimethris was absorbing the energy from the crystals. Sure enough, Chimethris's body was far more powerful compared to anyone he encountered before. Even the rate of his absorption was inhumane. Everyone that he gave a crystal so far needed at least a half day or more to absorb the crystals. It was the case even though what Mark gave them were those non-attributed ones that contained only an eighth of the energy compared to attributed crystals. Chimethris, however, only needed a few hours to absorb the energy from 3 attributed crystals. If Mark could stall these guests in another half hour, they would be able to leave this place without the need to show his cards. It was the best situation to happen. But then, at the slight moment that Mark took his attention away from the guests, a foreboding feeling overwhelmed him. Mark raised his face a glare towards the guests. His eyes brightly glowed as he dropped any notion of concealing it. But it was no use. Only those that had stable minds and a few that had no greed in their hearts managed to retain their sanity. As for the others, their minds turned into a chaotic mess where their greed consumed their rationality. Not good. The elder among cultivators shouted as he noticed the sudden changes in the members of his group. He also heard that voice that whispered into their heads, but only he and a young girl among his group managed to resist the temptation. As for the first group that arrived, the white-haired man and the red-haired witch did not know what to do. All their members seemed to have gone crazy and could not hear them at all. And for the other groups, all of them succumbed to the whispers of the devil. Except for 4 people, all those that came charged towards Mark and his group in one go. They looked like a bunch of crazed animals. "Mayor, Ilya, get ready to fight," Mark shouted as he conjured his blood scythe. May also readied her shooting moonblade, while Ilya wielded her daggers. Gritting his teeth, Mark cursed in his heart. There was no need to know what was happening. Without a doubt, the eye was playing with them. Mark turned towards the elder that was chasing after the members of his group. "If you want your members to live, you better catch them before they reach us." The elder could not help but turn to Mark just to see him beheading the first creature to approach. A display of ruthlessness without hesitation. If he did not hurry, the younger cultivators that came with him would have the same fate. Bang! May's weapon loudly echoed as she shot a bird-like humanoid that swooped towards her. On the other hand, Ilya agilely brandished her dagger as she stabbed the neck of an imp that approached her. Clang! Clang! Metallic sounds echoed as Mark parried to swords that slashed at him. In front of Mark, 2 young cultivators held the swords. Comparing physical strength, these 2 were far weaker compared to Huo Long Yu. Thus, with a quick push, Mark made the 2 men stagger backward. There, Mark stretched both hands to his right, extending the range of his scythe. "Stop!" The elder that managed to catch 2 members of his group shouted. However, Mark only glanced at him. Shing! Plop! Plop! Mark's scythe moved in a wide swing, beheading the 2 young cultivators. Their heads plopped down to the ground in front of the elder and the young girl in their group. The elder rushed down, but he was already late. He could only land in front of the 2 headless corpses. "Do you have to be that ruthless?" The elder questioned Mark, who was currently blocking a golem-like creature. The group of cultivators only had 7 people, including the elder. He managed to restrain 2, and the girl managed to catch 1. The other 2, however, were already beheaded by Mark. "I don't have the time to argue with you and your bullshit nonsense. I already told everyone to leave. Don't blame me if any of you die because of your stupidity." "Why you?" The elder was thoroughly infuriated. Sure enough, narrow-minded people hated to be blamed for the consequences of their own actions. Bang! Bang! May shot her sniper rifle continuously after each time she reloaded. These creatures were not easy enemies. They might have turned berserk, but they still had some senses remaining. Not all of them were blindly charging at Mark's group, and many were able to evade May's bullets. And the worst part, some of them were not even hurt after being shot by May. Crackle. A loud, crisp sound echoed in the surroundings. "Oh, sh*T. Mark could only curse as he stared above. The Thunderbird was going for a lightning attack. "Gather!" Mark shouted as he retreated towards Chimetris. May and Ilya did the same, although Ilya seemed to be at a loss of what to do. She immediately embraced Chimetris to shield him. One of the banes of evil beings were lightning attacks. Even though the Thunderbird could not kill Chimetris, he would receive injuries, especially since he basically had no defenses at this moment. Thoom. Thick branches of lightning fell to the ground as if a different end of the world came. At the last moment, Mark pulled May behind him as he stood in front of Ilya and Chimetris. Stretching his right hand forward, the photokinesis mental crystal flew in front of his palm. As the crystal glowed, all the branches of lightning that were about to hit them changed directions. Mark, May, and Ilya could feel the stinging and numbing sensation on their skin as the electricity from the lightning strikes scattered around them. The attack from the Thunderbird caused the remaining trees and plants to burst into flames. The small peninsula where the cursed tree stood before was now engulfed in flames. As the lightning attack ended, Mark stared at the sky. Several ugly winged demons were gathered, performing some sort of ritual. They chanted a language Mark never heard before, conjuring a large magic circle in front of them. "Mayor, Ilya, take care of this place." Mark spoke with a serene voice as his wings formed on his back. His wings glowed red, and with the strong gust of wind left by the flap of his wings, Mark flew up, leaving a trail of red light. Covering his scythe with a faint shade of miasma, he swiped it at the magic circle. Crash! The magic circle unexpectedly shattered in front of everyone, causing the demons to cough out blood with their ritual being interrupted. Not finished, Mark flapped his wings, charging towards the demons, waving his scythe from different angles. As he passed by, blood spurted from the bodies of demons before they fell from the sky. After dispatching the demons, Mark flew towards the other flying enemies. Bang! Bang! The shots from May's weapon echoed one after another. She was shooting the Wendigos from the first group that was now charging towards her. Unfortunately, she could only frown as all her shots missed the target. These Wendigos were really fast. Even with her bullet time, she was having a hard time chasing their erratic movements. Furthermore, even though her bullets were faster, it was hard to take aim when the two Wendigos were changing their direction at random. May wanted to try to shoot them more times, however, they were already too close. Click! Click! Clicking sounds echoed as May transformed her weapon as fast as she could. Clang! The metallic sound rang into their ears as May used her sword to block the teeth of the closest Wendigo that arrived before her. Creak! Creak! May wanted to pull the sword out of the Wendigo's bite, but like a clamp, it was not letting go. The worst thing was that she was already within reach of the other Wendigo. She needed to let go of her weapon if she wanted to dodge it. Bam! Unexpectedly, the second Wendigo was suddenly sent flying. There, Ilya came to the rescue, kicking away the Wendigo with all her might as she found a good timing to do so. The first Wendigo then tried to reach towards May with its long arms while keeping the shooting moonblade clamped between its teeth. Without letting go of her weapon, May jumped side to side, evading the hands of the Wendigo. After finding a good footing, May's feet released a red glow as she kicked the ground. May jumped without letting go of the sword. It caused her to turn upside down mid-air as she pulled the head of the Wendigo with her. Her unexpected movements caught the Wendigo off guard, causing its head to follow May against its will. At the moment its head was facing upwards with May's sword. It tried to resist, causing its uncontrolled movement to stop. At that moment, however, May was already falling towards its back and was already in an upright position. With both her feet, she kicked the nape of the Wendigo as hard as she could. Crack! The Wendigo's head bent at an impossible angle. Its neck stretched backward as its head dangled upside down on its back. As if fell lifeless on the ground, it finally let go of May's weapon. She immediately pulled it back and charged towards the other Wendigo that Ilya was stalling. At the sky, Mark saw May's movements as she killed the Wendigo. He kind of felt proud that the weak girl he saved before could not contend with inhumane creatures on her own. These creatures were different from the infected, after all. They had intelligence and uncanny abilities that not just anyone could handle. Shoom! Shoom! With those in mind, Mark flew in twisted patterns. He was currently maneuvering through a barrage of fireballs being shot from the mouth of several lizard-like creatures. Because Mark suddenly showed his capability of flight, he managed to gather most of the attention of the enemies. Right now, May and Ilya only needed to face a smaller number of creatures as most of them were aiming at him. But then, Mark suddenly felt some strong magical fluctuations. Clink, clink. Multiple metallic sounds echoed around Mark to his surprise. He immediately flew faster as he could not tell where the sounds were coming from. But then, below, while May and Ilya were fighting the other Wendigo, the elder cultivator suddenly made a move. He was still in the right mind. However, the sudden death of two of the disciples of their sect affected his mentality. The worst part, he was aiming for May and Ilya while they were occupied with a strong enemy. Mark saw the elder move and immediately flew down as fast as he could to intercept him. But then, clink, clink, the metallic sounds intensified around Mark. Suddenly, he felt a searing pain on his right foot as his fast flight suddenly came into a stop. Clink, clink. Mark ignored the pain, and he turned to his foot. There was a chain that came out of nowhere tightening around it. He had no time to think about it and immediately waved his scythe to cut the chain. Nevertheless, the wave of his scythe stopped midway as another set of chains appeared and caught his right arm. Mark was surprised. However, May's safety was his priority. He released a surge of miasma around the chains, causing it to disappear since it was made of magic. As he did, however, more chains appeared around him, tightening around his neck, waist, and other parts of his body. He became completely still midair. Below, the elder was already a few steps from May and Ilya. Mark did not care anymore. A cloud of miasma burst out of his body, melting all the chains that constricted him. He flapped his wings as hard as he could, trying to stop the elder. However, because of the chains and his hesitation, he was late. Ilya and May managed to react at the last second and noticed the elder behind them. Unfortunately, his glowing palms were already moving towards their bodies. Those were just palms, but for some reason, they could not move because of it. Bam! Bam! The two palms hit May and Ilya on their upper backs, causing them to cough out blood at contact. From the force of the attack, both women were flung several meters away before crashing in the middle of the memorial park. Ha ha ha! I'm just starting, the elder laughed. This is the consequence of killing disciples of our sect. The elder sure was in a crazed state, albeit mildly. It seemed that he received another whisper. But then, bam, the surroundings suddenly became colder. Day 129 to 4:13 p.m. Newton Lake, Veterans Memorial Park, Oakley, Camden County, New Jersey, United States of America. Swaying his feet as he sat by the bench, the boy watched the mayhem he created unfold. Without a doubt, he was quite amazed that Mark, May, and Ilya were able to hold on despite being swarmed by almost 100 powerful beings. Furthermore, they were the ones having the advantage. Of course, he was having fun watching this, and because of that, he wanted for it to not end fast. Thunderbird, attack! The boy whispered directly into the bird's head. That was when the strikes of lightning fell onto Mark's group, forcing him to take out the photokinesis mental crystal, and redirect the lightning by moving photons and electrons in the air. It made an invisible bridge that forced the lightning to change directions. The boy gleefully watched as Mark managed to ward off the attack of the Thunderbird. He was also surprised to see Mark take out an energy crystal that contained some kind of ability to redirect those lightning. Sure enough, Mark piqued his interest. The boy wanted to know how many things this enigma of the world was hiding. The boy looked above. Lesser demons, use your curse ritual. That was when the lesser demons that belonged to different groups coordinated strangely together and called out a large magic circle. Wendigos, attack those women and hold them back, the boy whispered as he turned to the two Wendigos that were on standby. Without a doubt, this boy was controlling everyone here with his whispers. Fueling their negative emotions and invading their thoughts, that was this boy's ability. And with this, all those with tainted but weak minds and hearts would end up submitting towards his whispers. As Mark shattered the magic circle, it gave the boy another wave of surprises. The boy thought that Mark would attack the demons doing the ritual first to stop it. He never expected that Mark would shatter the magic circle instead. Having these kinds of surprises was like ecstasy to this bored boy. He could not help but smile as he whispered his next commands. That was when he noticed that the beautiful woman in Mark's group actually managed to kill a Wendigo. That was one thing that even he as an eye would need some time doing. After all, he was not someone suited in physical combat. There, the boy noticed something that made him smile even more. It was the unstable mind of the elder after mulling over the death of two of the disciples that he brought with him. Because of this state, it became easier to get the elder under the boy's control. "It's a pity they died," the boy whispered to the mind of the elder. "Why don't you take revenge? Those two women had their backs towards you. Why not make that man know the consequences?" Fueling the elder's anger, he fell unto the boy's control. The elder then moved to make a sneak attack on May and Ilya. The boy suddenly looked up. How did he notice it that fast? The boy murmured as he saw Mark move to intercept the elder. "Witches, cursed chains." The boy whispered to all the witches in the area. Of course, not all the witches could use this magic. Those that could, however, targeted Mark, summoning chains around him. Unexpectedly, the first chain was severed by Mark's scythe, like that magic circle of the lesser demons. As that scythe some kind of magic-canceling weapon? The boy could not help but say before he whispered once more. "More chains. Constrict him." The boy smiled as he was surprised once more. It was not the scythe. Mark was the one who could negate the magic being thrown at him. There, more chains appeared to constrict Mark. That was when the boy was given a surprise that he never expected. It was actually not an ability to negate magic. Instead, it was miasma. A person with a human body using miasma was not unheard of. In cases that a human was possessed by a formless demon or a miasmic demon, they would be able to use miasma. Of course, it was by the will of the demon possessing them, and at that point, the consciousness of that human was already destroyed. Mark, on the other hand, there was not a single sign of being possessed was on him. "No way!" the boy excitedly exclaimed as he stood up from the bench he sat on. At that time, the elder's sneak attack had succeeded. "Ha ha ha! I'm just starting. This is the consequence of killing the disciples of our sect," the elder exclaimed, not knowing that he was under someone else's control. The elder was about to chase after May and Ilya that were thrown away because of his attack. It was when somehow, the temperature felt cold. Even the boy could not help but feel it. The actual temperature of the surroundings never changed. In fact, the whole area was currently on fire, and they were supposed to feel hot. And yet, they felt shivers. The boy immediately looked at the sky. "You got to be kidding me," the boy murmured. Asterisk 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 clink, clink, clink. Everything slowed down in Mark's eyes as he saw May cough out a mouthful of blood and as she was flung away like a rag doll. The only thing he could hear was the sounds of chains clinging unto his body as he hovered frozen. Mark then heard what the elder said as he laughed sadistically. "Consequences of killing disciples of your sect? No, it's not. It was the consequence of Mark trying hard to hide his cards despite the actual need to use them. He was being overcautious of the eyes that was lurking around somewhere. Being cautious was a good thing, but being overcautious could also bring disaster. I get it now," Mark thought as he slowly lost control of his supposed to be non-existent emotions. In many novels, especially Chinese ones, whenever the protagonist asked who their parents or their master's enemy were, they would tell the protagonist that it was not the right time for them to know, or they must become stronger first. It was because it would affect their growth and decisions too early. That was what Mark experienced. He learned about the observers and the eyes too early when only those that stepped unto the ranks of deities should know about them. That was why. "I don't care anymore," Mark thought as a chain tightened on his neck. "Whether it be the eyes, the observer, deities, or gods. Just come at me if you want to." Bam! A cloud of miasma exploded around Mark, disintegrating all the magical chains that surrounded him. In that explosion, many lesser demons were caught and fell down with their rotting bodies. There, a black mist flew out of the miasma, flying towards the elder as he rushed to May and Ilya. Mark then materialized in front of the elder, waving his scythe towards the enemy. Of course, the elder would not go down that easily. The elder's flying sword parried Mark's scythe. Nevertheless, the elder had to retreat because of Mark's attack. As the elder retreated, Mark turned to the other direction and rushed towards May. Mark kneeled down, lifting May's limp body. Blood trickled from her mouth, her face was pale, and she was unconscious. The injury she received from the elder was not trivial. On the contrary, although in severe pain between her wings, Ilya was still conscious. Slowly, she got up and turned to May since both of them were flung away. A demon's body was very sturdy, that was why Ilya was still conscious. On the other hand, even though May seemed to be a pureblood demon, she still had a human body. The attack they both received must have several times more effect on her body. As Ilya turned to May, however, she froze at the scene she saw. There, reddish-colored liquid trickled from Mark's mouth as his lips touched May's. Holding her as carefully as he could, making her drink the contents of his mouth. As his lips separated with May's, Mark caressed her head gently. Ilya was confused. If Mark was here, what happened to the enemies? When Ilya looked above, she was shocked. The enemies never stopped attacking. Above them, magical fireballs, lightning attacks, and even magical chains continued to rush rain towards them. Yet, none of the attacks reached as a film of black smoke circled around, covering them like a barrier. Each magical attack that touched the smoke was being absorbed by it. Ilya stared at Mark. Without a doubt, he was responsible for this. Mark then stood up, carrying May on his arms. He glanced at Ilya and moved his head slightly, telling her to follow. With difficulty, Ilya followed behind Mark. Returning where Chimetris sat unexpectedly, he was unharmed. What was happening could never be any obvious. Even though Mark was in the sky and May and Ilya were flung away, no one attacked Chimetris. The attacks were only concentrated on the three for a reason. Going back to where Chimetris sat down, Mark handed May to Ilya. She understood what he wanted her to do, but why was Mark not talking? Mark turned and walked away. With a wave of his hand, May, Ilya, and Chimetris were covered by that circling barrier made of miasma. Raising his head, Mark panned his eyes to all the enemies surrounding him, especially the elder. Mark was totally furious that he felt like losing himself, yet, he never felt so calm in his entire life. Rumble. Everyone froze as they all turned towards the sky. Thick black clouds started to form, spiraling menacingly. Lightning flashed, and thunder echoed. It was as if a storm was coming. Mark turned to the sky. He had not done anything yet. What was happening? Nevertheless, the scene felt familiar. That was right. It was the same event that happened when Mark regained his emphatic ability and gained Freed's psychic powers. It was the way the world welcomed something that should not exist in this plane. Mark closed his eyes. I see it now. Mark murmured. This ability was never intended to reach this point, wasn't it? With those words, Mark's eyes glowed red. It was not the usual red glow but deeper in color. There were even red sparks of electricity escaping from his eyes. Crash. Everyone froze as they heard something akin to shattered glass in their heads. Their greed, anger, and unnecessary emotions vanished in an instant. All of them froze as they tried to recall what was happening. They escaped from the eye's control. Mark's head felt heavy. He absorbed the negative emotions that everyone here had at this moment in one go. There, he released it. Bam, everyone froze in a different way. Their bodies were shivering. Fear and terror engulfed their minds as they looked at Mark. Flee. That was what echoed in their minds repeatedly. However, they could barely move, not even a step. Rumble. At the sky, the lightning intensified. Bam. From the center of the clouds, a very thick tower of lightning fell towards Mark. Because of the fear they were currently feeling, the enemies cheered and wished that Mark would turn to ash because of that lightning. Stop dreaming. Mark's voice echoed inside the tower of lightning that continuously fell onto him, pouring cold water on the enemy's wishes. Around Mark's arm, several crystals floated, glowing brightly. The lightning started to converge at one point. Everyone noticed that a crystal formed atop Mark's head. As the lightning ended, the crystal fell on Mark's hand. I left the first one at home. I should thank the heavens for giving me another one. Mark spoke with a sinister smile. As that new crystal joined the others, the sky rumbled once more. The enemies thought that another strike of lightning would fall onto Mark. Then, it rained, not water, but branches of lightning. There, all those that kept flying in the sky turned to charred corpses that littered the ground. I already told all of you to leave, but since none of you did, don't ever think of leaving. Day 129 to 4:15 p.m. Newton Lake, Veterans Memorial Park, Oakland, New Jersey, United States of America. The boy watched everything unfold before him. Although he was excited, he now had a bitter expression on his face. I provoked a monster, didn't I? He murmured. Heavenly lightning, judgment, lightning tribulation. There were a lot of names that this phenomenon was labeled with. It was the event where a living thing surpassed a threshold of a rule, causing the heavens to pour lightning on them and measure their existence. Those that perished under this lightning would be deemed unworthy, and of course, die. On the other hand, those that lived through this deadly event would continue to live on. This kind of event was more common among Chinese cultivators. It was because the goal of cultivation was to surpass the limits of their species in the first place. As for the event that unfolded this moment in front of the boy, it was unprecedented. Reaching this level of an empath was deemed impossible in the past. In fact, among all kinds of psychic abilities, empaths were the most common. It did not have too many requirements to be one aside from having more sensitivity towards the emotions of other people. However, because being able to understand emotions was a skill that could be learned through various methods, it was not given too much attention, unlike other flashy psychic abilities. Furthermore, there were no known methods for developing this ability further. If a person became an empath, only fate and luck could make them stronger. Unfortunately, that came with severe consequences. After the realm of understanding, the realm of absorbing followed. It was when the empath started to absorb the negative energy from the emotions of the people around them. This was where the ill effects of being an empath starts. It would become worse over time as there was no way for the empath to control it. Absorbing these negative energies could render the empath's emotional tendencies chaotic. They began to hate crowds of people and become moody most often. Next was realm of release. The energy accumulated by the empath started to leak from their bodies. It made people stay away from the empath as if they contained contagious diseases. People would also have the tendency to feel threatened for being around empaths in this realm, and those empaths were most often mistaken for criminals. It was also the last realm known for empaths to reach. Why? It was because none of them were able to surpass it. There was no known training to be able to restrict the absorption of energy, or in the least, forcefully release the negative energy they absorbed. With the negative emotional energies piling up in their heads, most of them would suffer severe depression. It would not be long until they either commit suicide or break into insanity. That was where the lives of empaths end up. That was the supposed fate of empaths. Now, however, the enigma called Mark existed. He surpassed the limits of empaths and embarked on a new field of existence. And as such, the world tested him. Damn, he was even able to break off my control on these idiots. The boy murmured. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. Mark glared at the enemies. He did not care if there was an eye watching at this moment. The only thing he wanted to do right now was to kill. His killing intent intensified. The veins in his whole body glowed red. There, one of the crystals shined brightly as Mark's visage blurred. Then, he vanished. When Mark vanished, all the enemies were alarmed. That was when they finally noticed. "We can move," one of the lesser demons shouted. "Run." Sure enough, that was the first thing that came into their minds when they regained the ability to move their bodies. Unexpectedly, there were three that did things differently. Feng Jiruo. Bring them here. the elder shouted to the female disciple that guarded her unconscious teammates. Why yes. The girl called Feng Jiruo was flustered. Nevertheless, she managed to control several flying swords to transport her teammates towards the elder. As the girl landed, 100 swords array, the elder shouted. Around their group, 100 swords made of blue light appeared, circling to defend them. On the other side, the white-haired man and red-haired witch also gathered what remained of their group and watched each other's backs. When the members of their group gathered together, the red-haired witch waved her hand, making a long wooden staff to appear. She then tapped the end of her weapon on the ground, causing a large magic circle to appear that became the base of a thick magical barrier. Without a doubt, their movements were the smartest at this moment. As for the others, they tried to escape as fast as they could. Even those within groups decided to go in different directions. They were hoping that the others would get targeted instead, allowing them to escape. But then, they noticed. A tall wall of miasma appeared around the area surrounding them. At the sky, lightning continued to strike anyone that tried to fly. They thought that once they were allowed to move, they would be able to leave, but no. They were only given a false hope, giving them a little bit of hope for survival when there was no chance for any of these hopefuls to live. Ah! A scream was heard, making everyone look at a demon. The demon was in an awkward position as his body was leaned forward like he was running away. However, he was frozen in place, and his right shoulder and arm were stretched out backward. In a blink of an eye, Mark's visage faded in on the back of the demon. He was holding onto the demon's shoulder and arm with his glowing red hands. Then, rip! Ah! The demon's wails intensified. His black blood splattered as his left arm was mercilessly ripped off his shoulder. Mark then gave a ruthless kick on the demon's leg. Despite the demon's wails, everyone heard his bones crack as he fell to the ground. When the demon fell, it felt something stepping on his head. It tried to look above, and it fell unto despair. It saw Mark smiling despite the stains of blood dripping from his face. And there, the demon heard Mark speak. "You're the luckiest one." Mark's sinister voice echoed as he pulled the demon up using its left horn. "Look at them." Mark made the demon see the others that had no way of escaping. For some reason, they were all pale, shivering, and terrified. "You know why you are lucky?" Mark continued. Of course, the demon could not even give a proper response. "You know why all of them look like that? Your pain, fear, horror, agony. Everything you are feeling right now, it is being transmitted to everyone. You are lucky since you only get to feel your own pain. Shouldn't you be grateful that you are chosen?" Hee. Those sentences were the last things the demon heard before its neck was torn off from its body. That demon was lucky, without a doubt. Mark held the demon's head for a few seconds before throwing it away. That was when he looked at the others to look for the next one. Sure enough, everyone was looking at Mark in horror. It was true. Everything that the demon that had just died was experienced by them. Although their bodies were not in actual pain, the pain transmitted in their minds made them felt as if it was their arms and necks that were being torn off. Seeing those expressions, Mark turned to the elder. The elder seemed to have more tenacity than the others. Unfortunately, it seemed that Mark had a very ruthless plan for the old man. "Don't worry." Mark smiled. "You will be the last one. Let's see how long it will take before deciding to take your life instead. Ha ha ha." The elder looked at Mark wide-eyed. With this kind of punishment, even his defensive treasures and techniques were rendered useless. "Everyone, let's team up and kill him, or else, all of us will suffer before we die." The elder shouted, asking for the cooperation of the others. It did not matter whether they came from different groups. It did not matter if they were demons, monsters, or humans. What mattered was that they were all going to die if none of them made a move. "Sword!" The elder shouted with his index and middle fingers pointed at Mark. A beam of golden light in the shape of a sword shot towards Mark. The golden sword flew towards Mark at the speed of a bullet. With a very slight movement, Mark evaded the sword. Unexpectedly, after it passed from his side, it turned around to chase. A homing one? Mark smiled sinisterly. He disappeared without a trace. However, the sword continued to fly in a direction. The golden sword flew towards another demon. That demon was surprised and tried to dodge, just to find out that its body was locked in place. Hey! Stop! The demon wailed. Then, it felt a heavy mass on its head, forcing it to lean forwards. Shirk! Right at the dead center of its forehead, the golden sword burrowed itself before disappearing. Mark appeared, holding the dead demon's head. He then turned to see the others. Some of them were kneeling while others were on deep shock while they suppressed the pain on their foreheads. He. Mark let out a stifled laugh. That golden sword was made out of energy the elder had. Being hit by it would not only make one feel pain but would feel the invasion of the man's chi onto the wound. And all these enemies, including the elder himself, felt that excruciating pain on their heads despite being illusory. What are you all waiting for? The elder shouted once more. Finally, the others reacted. Attack! Go! Yells of retaliation echoed from the remaining enemies as they let out different attacks towards Mark. Some of the demons shot out fireballs from their mouths. Some of them shot projectiles from their bodies. The others charged towards Mark with their weapons and claws. Futile. Mark let out one word as his body vanished once more. All the attacks never hit their target. Mark then appeared behind a female demon that did not attack. Since this demon had already resigned to its fate, Mark did not mind killing her first. Feeling the palm planted on her back, the female demon closed her eyes, only to open it abruptly. Gahah. The female demon felt something invading her body, transforming her blood to metal. It was a slow and painful death. Unexpectedly, the female demon could let out a smile as she died. It was because she saw how the others squirmed like worms as they all shared her pain. Mark then held the female demon's head for a few seconds before letting it go. As he went for the next target, the corpse of the female demon was left behind, kneeling like a statue. One by one, Mark killed these foolish enemies in different ways. Their limbs being decapitated, their heads being smashed open, bones being crumbled to pieces, rotting their eyes with miasma, burning them with lightning starting with their stomach. Mark did not hold back with the torture. For every kill that Mark made, the remaining ones started to lose the will to live. It did not take long, and some started to fall into insanity. Mark had fun looking at their slumped bodies on the ground. Their eyes lost their life. Their saliva leaked out of their mouths as they became numb to even close it. Some brandished their claws, tearing their own heads apart. Some fell unconscious, only to wake up because of more pain inflicted on their minds. Unexpectedly, the elder was still holding on. Of the disciples, however, only the girl was left. As for the others, they woke up and suffered until they brandished their swords to slit their own necks. The elder watched all those happen, unable to do anything. Damn it. It's all your fault. The elder heard a struggling voice not far from him. There, the white-haired man and the red-haired witch were present, barely able to stand. As for the ones with them, they were all unconscious. The man and the witch used some method to block off Mark's mental torture. However, it seemed that they expended all their energy and could not use that technique to themselves. It did not take long. While not everyone was dead, only the elder, the white-haired man, and the red-haired witch were left conscious. And now, they were being stared at by Mark's piercing glare. Day 129 to 6:22 p.m. Newton Lake, Veterans Memorial Park, Oakland, Camden County, New Jersey, United States of America. Mark turned his head to the side. Some are still alive, but only you three are the only ones still conscious. I presume. It's their turn now. Mark smiled as he calmly walked towards the unconscious members of the group, led by the white-haired man. Stop. The white-haired man shouted. Why are you doing all this? That woman only got hurt. She's not even dead. Hearing those words, Mark paused on his steps. Then, I'll ask you. Mark faced the man, tilting his head in confusion. Why not? The elder, the white-haired man, and the red-haired witch stared at Mark with wide eyes. Regular people, no, even most creatures would not be able to see it. Around Mark, his killing intent was already forming a thick, suffocating aura. We are just sitting there peacefully, until all of you came uninvited. Mayor. She shouldn't have been hurt in the first place. That is if none of you came here. Or at least, you all went on your ways after I told you all to go leave. Now, tell me. Why not? Feeling Mark's killing intent, the white-haired man and the red-haired witch concluded that any negotiation could not happen. Mark was keen on killing them. There, with resignation in their eyes, the two nodded at each other. Seeing that gesture and noticing their resignation, Mark realized that these two still had a card left to use despite their already exhausted magical energy reserves. He had no notion of letting them escape. With a wave of Mark's hand, he sent a large cloud of miasma to cover the two and their subordinates. Unfortunately, Mark was already late. The two clapped their hands together, and their bodies shined brightly. It was the same for their subordinates. In an instant, their bodies turned into beams of lights that fired off towards the sky. Mark hurriedly controlled the lightning to block the beams of light. However, the beams of light were too fast. Although Mark managed to hit 3, which immediately turned into either ash or corpse, the rest managed to escape through the clouds and fly away. TCH. Mark clicked his tongue. He was too careless to let them escape. However, if those two were too hesitant to use this escape technique until the last moment, the repercussions of this technique might have been too harsh. Mark looked at the direction the beams of light flew. I'll see you again in the future. That time, I won't let any of you escape again. That was right. There was no need to mull over the escape of that group. With the hatred between Mark and Ouroboros, the chances of not seeing them again were too low. Now that he had seen this technique, their other members would not be able to use it again in front of him. Mark turned to the elder. You're the last one now. What do you say for yourself? The elder glared at Mark. An evil creature like you will receive your retribution in the future. Mark stared at the elder, frozen in shock, then peeved. Ha 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 ha. Mark burst out in laughter. Shameless. Too shameless. Ha 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 ha. Can you repeat that? Do you hear yourself? Really? Mark's voice, filled with overwhelming ridicule, made the elder's face red with both fury and unacceptable embarrassment. I won't deny it. I might be evil. Mark took a deep breath. At least, I don't make the first move. I rather avoid conflict if I could. I don't hurt innocent people, I don't steal without a legitimate reason, and I always return good intentions. But entitled people like you appear like mushrooms, thinking that you should be respected. Trying to steal what is not yours, treating others like ants, and thinking as if you are above everything else. Get off your high horse, you maggot. I don't care what you do to others, but mess with me or my people. Prepare to get the worst treatment from me. Do you really think that your sect is any good? The way you talk sounds like you came from some sort of a righteous sect, right? Looking at you and these trashed though, Mark stepped on the corpse of one of the disciples with the elder, causing it to burst open. I believe that sect of yours is filled with garbage pretending to be humans. Why you? The elder could not talk properly anymore. The elder's face was as red as a fried octopus because of the ridicule that Mark was giving him and his sect. To a cultivator, although not all, most of them see their sects as their home. Many of them would lay their lives than letting their sects be ridiculed. It was even if the ridicule they were receiving was more of the truth than lies. Well, I guess. That's your last words. Mark smiled. There. Mark's eyes brightly glowed as it could. Gahhhhhh. The elder was already prepared to be killed. In fact, the elder already blocked his meridians so that even if he received physical torture, he would not feel any pain until he died. However, he never expected to be killed in this way. Since you have a high mental fortitude, let's see how much you can handle. Mark's voice echoed as blood started to flow out of the elder's eyes and ears. Gah! Stop! Stop! The elder wailed, holding his head with both his hands. He felt like his brain was about to burst. However, as the pain was not physical, he would continue to suffer until his consciousness could not handle it anymore. Bang! Bang! The elder started to give up. He began banging his head on the concrete. Blood trickled on his forehead as he got wounded. But as a cultivator with quite a high cultivation and specialized in close combat, his body was sturdier than others. Even if he used his head to dig his own grave on the concrete pavement he was kneeling at, he would still be too far from dying. Finally, the elder gave up. Boom! His body burst into an explosion of flesh and blood. As it was unexpected, Mark's body was drenched in blood since he stood quite close to the elder. The glow in Mark's eyes vanished as he stared at the pile of meat that the elder turned into. Did he detonate himself? Mark murmured. Shouldn't there be some sort of energy buildup and a large explosion like how it is portrayed in novels? Mark was confused. In the least, he already vented off most of his anger. But then, Mark froze as the blood that drenched his body glowed. Asterisk asterisk. Damn it, an old voice echoed. That demon pushed me to this state. It was no other than the elder. He was currently inside a dark space, cursing his fate. Damn it. The elder cursed once more as he checked his semi-transparent body. Using that technique will not only destroy my body but also damage my spirit. Though I doubt he will find me in here. I just need to wait until my spirit recovers, and I can take over this demon's body. The spirit transfer technique. It was an evil technique that the elder accidentally found in a tomb and had been practicing in secret. With this technique, he would sacrifice his body and damage his spirit to invade and take over another person's body. However, the target needed to be drenched with the user's blood, and this technique could only be used once. The second time that it was used, it would pulverize the spirit of the user. Because of that, the target of the technique should be carefully chosen. In the elder's case, however, he had no choice but to use it to escape the suffering. Besides, the target right now was rather good. The elder then looked around. Where am I? Shouldn't I enter that demon's consciousness using that technique? Yeah. You are inside my consciousness. The elder froze. He heard the demon's voice behind him. Then, the surroundings became bright, forcing the elder to cover his eyes. When it regained his sight, he looked around. It was a paradise. Is this heaven? The elder murmured. Nope. You are inside my consciousness. This time, the elder jumped forwards and looked behind him. His eyes turned wide as if he had seen a ghost. How? In front of the elder, Mark stood. Why are you asking me when it's you who entered my world? Mark replied with a smile. His smile, however, looked like the omen of death for the elder. That was when the elder realized how f***cked he was. Why? Why do you have a consciousness like this? Only cultivators that stepped into the levels of deities are known to create a world inside their sea of consciousness. It's impossible. This is impossible. The elder was about to break. Not only Mark had to make him suffer, but Mark was also breaking the rules he knew. Now, are you ready to be swallowed by me? Mark spoke, making the elder feel the kind of fear he never felt for his whole life. You already served yourself in a silver platter, you see? Mark said, once more. There, the elder noticed where he was standing. It was in the middle of a silver platter. From there, the elder realized. He looked at his hands. He was starting to disintegrate. No. No. Fool. Mark murmured as he watched the existence of the elder vanish to oblivion. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. Mark opened his eyes. Who would have thought that an elder proud of his righteous sect would resort to an evil technique? Shouldn't they be proud of dying with dignity? What a hypocrite. Mark shook his head. It would take a while before the memories of the elder integrate into his own. However, Mark was not expecting too much. After all, the elder's consciousness was heavily damaged. Are you done? A voice echoed behind Mark. He turned around. It was Chimetris. It was already past 2 hours since Mark started to kill the enemies. Chimetris had long been awake and was watching Mark vent his anger. He had no reason to interfere and just looked after Ilya and May in case that something unexpected happened. Not yet. There's still the last one, Mark replied. You better remove that barrier you made. I can pass through, but Ilya can't. Chimetris pointed at Ilya. She was guarding May while being trapped in the barrier of miasma Mark made. Mark turned to Chimetris. He made it out of his miasma without any damage. What a sturdy body this chimera had. Luckily, he was not an enemy. Shrugging his shoulders, Mark turned elsewhere. He then approached and picked up an unconscious person. It was the young girl among the group cultivators. He had no reason to kill her. She never did anything harmful. However, there was no reason for him to let her go either. After all, she was still among the reasons why May was harmed. Mark lifted the girl, bringing her with him. He then walked with Chimetris towards May and Ilya. As Mark removed the barrier and put down the girl, he shouted, "Aren't you going to come out now?" Saying those words, Mark turned towards the bench not far from them. Chimetris also turned, alert, and ready to fight. There, like a ghost, a child appeared, sitting on that bench. A boy with 5 eyes. Without a doubt, this boy was an eye, and the one caused the commotion. Amazing. How did you find me? Even that chimera beside you can't tell where I am. Mark tilted his head. Why don't you look around you? The boy was confused and looked around. Ha 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 ha, no wonder. The boy laughed. It was because almost the whole park was already razed to the ground. The walkways were destroyed, and the trees and grass were burned. With all that, however, the bench and the small area around it was unscathed. Mark then glanced at Chimetris. Let's go together against this one. No problem. I already recovered, thanks to you, Chimetris replied with a resolute expression. Sensing Mark's and Chimetris's intent to fight, the boy hurriedly spoke. Wow. Relax, all right. I have no intention of fighting you two. Besides, you won't even be able to touch me if we did. There was no lie in that. Mark and Chimetris could not sense the boy at all, even though he already appeared. He was like a ghost. You could feel the chill, but you would not be able to see it unless it showed itself. Day 129 to 6:31 p.m. Newton Lake, Veterans Memorial Park, Oakland, Camden County, New Jersey, United States of America. Mark frowned deeply. The fact that he could not sense any lies from the boy made him want to kill this entity even more. You're saying that after starting all this mess? Mark could not help but speak out those words with anger. When Mark said that question, however, the boy smirked in a very annoying way. Don't look at me like that. It's not like I'm going to deny my part in this. You can hate me all you want, but give it up. You can't do anything to me. Those words of the boy made Mark feel heavy. Because of this boy, May got hurt. Yet, he did not know whether he would be able to do anything against this boy. This boy was an eye without a doubt. Nevertheless, he was very different from those that Mark had seen before. The first one he saw was from Freed's memories, that gigantic 1,000-eyed tentacle monster. The second was that parasite-like creature that controlled that infected giant. The third was the puppet that the Great One controlled. Each of them had different characteristics, which made Mark assume that this boy was also unique. And Mark was not mistaken. This boy that had 5 eyes was truly unique, in an absurd way. Aren't you here to erase us? Chimetris asked. He was quite confused as to why this eye seemed to have no intention to fight. Why? The boy replied as he climbed up the backrest of the bench. Did any of you came from another universe? Did any of you come from another realm? Where did you even hear that? That reply made Chimetris turn to Mark. After all, what he knew about this came from him. Nevertheless, Mark was also surprised by that reply. The boy turned to Mark. Did you hear about us from a god in hiding? No, that's definitely why. The boy nodded as if he understood something. Actually, That's only the case for beings that came from other worlds, you know. What are you saying? Mark could not help but ask. His anger towards the boy was yet to subside. Nevertheless, he was regaining his calm because of the information he was receiving from the boy. The boy then jumped down and sat on the armrest of the bench. Did you two know? With how Earth was constructed, stepping into godhood for any of its children is almost impossible. But gods and deities that came from other worlds, universes, and realms came in this godless land and turned this into their playground. That is why the first thing our master did is to remove these pests when he took the position of this world's observer. There, the boy continued to explain playfully. According to him, Earth is created as a magicless planet. Its residents should experience a life where science developed, and its creatures had relied on natural evolution to grow. But with the gods from other realms arriving, this rule was broken. Unfortunately, it was the fault of the previous observer. That observer was too lazy to manage the world and let the invaders go rampant. Thus, creatures recorded in Earth's legends and mythologies were born because of the magical energy, the mana, that these gods brought from their worlds. And as the rules of the world distorted, many more things deviated from its initial path. The magical races, demon races, and other unnatural beings were born, one after another. When our master stepped up to replace the previous observer, it was already late to bring this world to its original state. The boy said with a shrug, "But our master is not a ruthless person." The boy smiled. He gave some leeway for creatures that were born of this world. It was even if they were born by the effect of the invaders on this world. The boy then looked straight at Mark. "Since you have demon blood, I presume that you know about the spirit dimension, the higher dimension, and the lower dimension. Do you know about those?" "I do." Mark replied with a frown. "It is us who created those dimensions," the boy said with a proud expression. "We created those places to keep and segregate the beings born in this world after the gods appeared. The servants of those gods, the angelic beings, the holy warriors, and those that were directly created by gods, they were all designated at the higher dimension. Those that were born of nature, fairies, cryptids, lesser demons, and the like, they were left in the spirit dimension. A beautiful paradise filled with plants and animals but also had a darker side. Lastly, the greater demons, the devils, fallen angels, and the embodiments of sins. They were all sent to the lower dimension. That way, humans could dominate the world once more, being its main occupants. But as you can see," the boy pointed at Mark, "even though most of the gods already left this world, their existence in that lost era affected the future. From time to time, enigmas like you were born. There were also times that humans with superhuman abilities would appear. As long as none of you disturbed the balance and current pace of the world, we really have no reason to make any movement. In fact, we even give the option to live in the dimensions I mentioned instead. As long as the rules were being followed, there was no problem. No matter how strong the enigma was, it did not matter if they knew how to listen. They would be allowed to exist. It was because those people were still the children of this world. Of course, it was a different story if the enigmas of the world tried to distort its rules." After hearing all these things, a mystery popped up inside Mark's head. Then what about the blood demons? That was right. The blood demons, Mark's supposed ancestors, were annihilated by the schemes of the eyes. That question surprised the boy. "Are you talking about that race of demons that can turn any other race into their own using their blood?" I believe it's second and fourth that did that," the boy muttered. "I don't know where you heard about them, but their race is wiped out because their very existence is a twist of the rules itself." "You know why?" The boy shrugged. "It's because their blood can turn invaders into someone considered as born of this world. It is against the rules since our duty is to remove them. If they became one of the blood demons, even us can't do anything unless they defied another rule. In other words, the blood demons could give shelter towards the invaders, and the observer could not let that happen. Thus, they decided to be cautious and eliminate the source of threat instead." Hearing that, Mark understood. As long as one was naturally born on this planet, on this earth, they would be fine. It was as long as they did not defy the rules stated by the observer. In this case, it seemed that Mark was worrying too much for nothing. However, it could not be helped. After all, he only heard one side of the story. Mark felt relaxed. In the least, he knew now that he would not be erased without reason. It was not like Mark was afraid of dying. But at least not now that he started to enjoy life. With something in mind, Mark stared at the boy. With what happened right now, haven't we exceeded the rules you were talking about? It was the right question. With how much commotion caused by Chimetrus's revival and the effects of the battle that had just happened, it would not be surprising if Mark and Chimetrus were still in the kill list. However, it seemed that it was not the issue. That's the reason I'm here, you know? The boy smirked, tapping his temple with his right index finger. With those questions you two asked, I'm sure that you two haven't received the news yet. That announcement made Mark frown even more. He did not know whether it would be a good or a bad thing. All of you know, right? What state the world is in, right now. That is why there is a change or rules. There, the boy playfully laughed as he opened both his arms wide. You two don't have to fear. No matter how absurd your existence is, as long as you are not an invader, feel free to do what you want. What do you mean? Mark asked as what the boy mentioned was really vague. What do you not understand? The boy tilted his head. As I said, do what you want. Fight here, kill there, conquer countries, anything. Even if you want to slaughter a whole country, it's fine. It was an unexpected announcement. Mark could not believe that something like this was possible. It was too good to be true, in a sense. Why did the rules have such a U-turn? Chimetrus asked with a frown. He was not a fool to believe the boy that fast. There, the boy sighed. Because of this outbreak, apocalypse, end of the world, or whatever you want to call it. It caused the foundations of the world to collapse. Soon, even the three subdimensions would open and fuse with the surface. I wonder if you know that already. Then, the boy continued with a piece of information that made Mark freeze. This is just the first wave. It won't be long, and the second wave will come. This information would be enough to shake the lives of the people still remaining on Earth. The population of Earth was already severely shaved off the surface because of mutagen. Now, there was another wave. Why not just destroy the Earth directly? Is that why those creatures and even the cultivators are being active now? Mark asked. Yeah, pretty much, the boy replied. Their leaders might have received the news already. Only those with enough strength like you two are allowed to know this information, after all. The boy then smiled at Mark. You understand now why I have to force you to show your true strength. Although I can pretty much judge what kinds of creatures you are, I don't have any ability to know or read your abilities. I have to force it out of you since you did not seem to want to show it. Mark's frown went deeper and deeper. So, May was hurt because of this? He found it rather unacceptable. Can you wipe that frown out of your face? The boy urged. I needed to do that to be able to see your potential. Or else, I won't deem you legible to receive this information. So far, you are the only person that had yet to step to the realm of deities to receive this news, so be grateful. Mark suddenly had the urge to punch this boy's face. But then, Mark had some realization. Is this why the sealed deities and demons started to find ways to revive themselves? Mark blurted out. Well, yeah. The boy tilted his head. Since this mess started, all of us, the apostles of the Observer, had been running around. Cultivators, underground organizations, as long as they had deities, we informed them. Well, even if we didn't, there are already those that started to break their seals. When this mess started, a large amount of energy was released into the earth, allowing them to break free even before we found them. The boy then pointed at Chimetrus. Like him, though I think it's quite different in this case. Well, then. I did what I needed to do. I should get going. I still need to go back to Slee work. The boy then jumped and started to float away. Oh, I forgot to introduce myself. The boy turned around for the last time. I am the current ninth eye, the embodiment of boredom. You all can call me ninth. As you can see, my body is plain, boring, and almost non-existent. See you two some other time. Finally, the boy left in an instant. Mark and Chemetris still had some questions. However, they felt that it was better to let that boy leave already. Just with the boy being around made them feel as if they were walking at the edge of a blade.